Well, good morning, Simon. I think it's good afternoon for you. It's about tea time for you, isn't it?
It is, yes, but hey, we could be listening at any time, so I'll just say hello there, Karen. It's a great pleasure to be speaking with you.
We've been trying to do this for a while. I'm very keen to hear the story of Borders Rail because it seems to me that it has some very useful lessons to offer those of us who are working in the United States to restore passenger rail. I actually was in Argyle when a friend sent me a link to your website, the Campaign for Border Rail, and I'd like you to please. You're the chair. Can you step back in time a little bit and give us a sense of how this campaign, very successful campaign, began and how it's evolved to this point?
Certainly. We started by saying we've been trying to do this interview for quite a long time. You know, we've been working at the campaign for quite a long time as well. This campaign was actually founded last century, 1999 to be precise. And what it's all about is it goes back in history to something which happened in the UK in the 1960s. That wasn't the best of times for rail in the UK at all. The railway network had never really recovered from the privations of the war in Europe, and it had progressively been run down. Now, the thing about Britain was that we proudly claim to be the first industrial nation and the first railway network in the world, but with that goes a lot of baggage, not least that everyone else had the opportunity to learn from our mistakes. And very much the railway network is very much an unplanned agglomeration of railway lines throughout the country. There was much commercial duplication and many lines that were built which were never going to be financially viable. And much of that was inherited into the 20th century. And after the Second World War, the railways really were on their commercial knees to the extent that it was taken into public ownership, the entire network, in 1948, January the 1st of that year. And the railways soldiered on in the face of many problems, both problems economic and problems social, and I guess problems political as well, in that several decisions were taken, probably with the best of intentions, to make the railways resilient and self-sufficient for the future, which is probably why Britain persevered for 2 decades, longer than anyone else, with steam traction, which was outmoded, expensive, and in the light of a burgeoning auto industry and governments which were progressively more wedded to the idea of personal mobility and personal freedom, really neglected the railways to the extent that they were losing money hand over fist. And in the 1960s, a government-sponsored review, which is commonly known as the Beeching Acts, was undertaken. Yeah,
I moved to Britain as a teenager in the 70s, in the late 70s, and I heard then about Beeching. It was sort of a familiar name, and I realized wasn't that long before, actually.
Yeah, that's true. Richard Beeching, the man who carried out this review, he had been a businessman. He was chairman of a chemical industries company, and he was an outsider brought in to review the railways, and he did so. He answered his remit, and I could go on at length about how that remit was rather unjust and was promoted by a transport minister who had vested financial interests in building freeways. So the outcome was no surprise to anyone. It was clear to see, and the unequivocal fact that came out of the review was that 50% of the network was carrying 4% of the traffic.
Wow.
So Mr. Beeching, or Dr. Beeching, his name, his title, made the commercial decision that half the network had to go, and it did. How he went about that is open to question. Mm-hmm. But to cut a long story short, the biggest single closure in his proposals was the 100 miles between Edinburgh, the Scottish borders, and the English town of Carlisle, commonly known in folklore as the Waverley route.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell listeners, please, who aren't familiar with this, what border is it?
Okay, the borders, the Scottish borders, are the area which is the very south of Scotland and borders onto the very north of England. These lands have been historically disputed, of course, over the centuries.
Yes.
We've all seen Braveheart, that
right,
historical documentary. But these lands have changed hands between Scotland and England many times over the centuries. And as such have grown a resilience of their own, and indeed grown a community and a culture of their own. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But they are not the central part of either Scotland nor England, and they are quite remote from both.
The two.
Yeah, the railways hugely changed the borders for the better. Mm-hmm. They brought together many disparate communities, made it possible to travel between them, made it possible to connect and communicate with the centres of government in both Scotland and England.
Because Edinburgh is in Scotland and Carlisle is in England to the west, so it's a sort of diagonal trajectory.
It actually it's almost a straight line. It's just the way that Britain leans drunkenly over.
Right.
But remarkably, Edinburgh is actually further west than Carlisle, although Edinburgh is on the east coast of Scotland and Carlisle is on the west coast of England.
Okay. All right. We'll have to include a map. even more ignorant, perhaps, than I am.
The geography is not really the relevant point here. Mm-hmm. The relevant point is the remoteness of these communities. Mm-hmm. And they're not large communities by global standards, but we are talking a line which directly served about 100,000 people over its 100 miles, which is certainly not dense urban figures by any stretch of the imagination. Nevertheless, because the communities were widely separated, the service was not very attractive. So ridership was very low. And Beeching, of course, saw that as a line which is uneconomical.
Describe the countryside there. What is it like, say, to drive around? I mean, what does it look like?
I think the easiest way to describe it is it's the Scottish Highlands in the lowlands. Mm-hmm. The countryside is quite hilly, not quite as mountainous as other parts of Scotland, but not flat by any means. Wide areas of forest and agricultural land interspersed with what I can really only describe as archetypical Scottish towns. Beautiful stone-built high street.
Very beautiful. I've looked at some of the photographs.
It's inspirational, and not just to me. It's inspirational to the writer Walter Scott. Walter Scott made his home in the borders. His house actually lies less than 2 miles from the current terminus of the Borders Railway. And if anyone needs any confirmation of Walter Scott's popularity, in his lifetime, he outsold Jesus. He actually sold more copies of his books than were sold in the Western world of the Bible. That's how popular he was. Yeah. That's why there's a 250-foot monument to him in the centre of Edinburgh. His most famous works are an epic series called the Waverley novels.
Oh, I see. Yes, I hadn't made that connection.
Yeah,
Um,
and that actually is the reason why the main station in Edinburgh, which is one of the biggest stations in Britain, is called Edinburgh Waverley Station. And this line that runs through the borders was laterally promoted as the Waverley route, since it runs through.
Makes complete sense. Yes,
it runs through
thank you for that.
all of the places that you'll find in Walter Scott's novels. That's the historical context of this railway line. It's not the only connection between Scotland and England, and that really was its downfall. It's difficult terrain, as I said. It's quite hilly, and there are lots of river crossings, viaducts, and some very difficult tunnels on this line. And of the routes between Scotland and England, it was clearly the most expensive to maintain, and not the fastest either by any means. It was, in any rationalisation, it would be the first one to go, and so it happened that it was lost, and it was lost in January the 6th, 1969.
But the people of the area clearly didn't forget about it.
No, they fought very hard to retain their line, so much so that at one small community on the line, the population padlocked shut the gates on the level crossing, which is a very serious offence. So much so that the serving minister, the reverend, the religious minister for the town, was actually arrested, and he is to this day, he's the only serving member of the cloth to have been arrested for breach of the peace in the UK in the 20th century.
Was he Scottish?
He was, the Reverend.
He was. You're a fierce band.
But I think rather than his nationality, it was his commitment to the community that was the reason behind his taking part in this very heartfelt protest. In fact, the campaign actually, our committee is represented in the town of Newcastleton, which is the small village, not to be confused with the English city of almost the same name. They reenacted the padlocking of the gates precisely 50 years after the event.
I hope that's on YouTube, because we'll have to link to it.
Yeah.
So the campaign began again in 1999.
Well,
or the campaign started.
Formally the campaign was incorporated in 1999, but there's been a movement to re-establish the railway ever since it closed.
Yes, I imagine that's certainly the case here in places where you meet people who've never forgotten, and yet it has to be organized.
There's many reasons why the community were up in arms about this closure. They felt that the review process had been inefficiently undertaken, hadn't really taken into account any of the hardships that it would bring. And it's true, the economic hardships in the borders are well documented. This part of Scotland, whilst beautiful, I have to say, is among the most economically deprived in the entire country. And the campaign would argue that it's lack of communication, lack of connectivity that has contributed most to that state of affairs. And it was for these reasons that the campaign was formed. I should point out that we are not a heritage railway organisation. It's not our intention to have built a railway that tourists will enjoy. Any more than the community will use on a day-to-day basis. And that has always been our intention. Our intention has always been the reinstatement of this entire main line, this 100 miles between the capital of Scotland.
And where is it now? It doesn't run the full 100 miles at this point.
No, it doesn't. And there are two sides to that tale as well.
Mm-hmm.
The campaign has been the most successful grassroots lobby organisation in the country, in that we have persuaded government to rebuild 35 miles of railway line between the city of Edinburgh and the community of Galashiels, which is in the centre of the Scottish borders.
And that line was abandoned. It didn't have anything running on it?
It was completely abandoned. Mm-hmm. The tracks had been lifted. Most of the stations had been demolished. The only thing in our favour was that the Victorian infrastructure, in so much as the earthworks, or in engineering terms, the solum of the line, broadly speaking, still existed. That made it economically possible to rebuild.
What about I saw in a photograph an amazing viaduct. Where is that?
That is actually not far from Edinburgh. That is Lothian Bridge Viaduct, or Newbattle Viaduct. It has two names. 17 stone arches. It's only 10 miles south of Edinburgh,
mm-hmm.
and it offers spectacular views from the train, I'm glad to say,
mm-hmm.
of the countryside and the town around. The railway runs through several small counties, small by United States standards, but it runs from the city of Edinburgh through the county of Midlothian into the Scottish borders, briefly into Dumfries and Galloway, before crossing the border into Cumbria in England, and eventually into the city of
mm-hmm.
Carlisle. There isn't a mile of the line which does not have a spectacular view. So despite the fact that I've said this line is not built for tourists, it's now open and it is used hugely by tourists because it is such a spectacular
I have to say the line that I focus on, the Berkshire line from New York City to Berkshire County, is very similar. We're not nostalgic about it, but it actually will be a very beautiful ride.
Yeah.
So, that's one, I'm glad to hear about that, because it's nice to be able to combine those.
Well, it's been a long haul to get to where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a long time to get the political persuasion behind the building of the line. But when the Scottish Parliament, because transport issues are
mm-hmm.
a responsibility of the Scottish Parliament, when they decided the line was going to be built, they did take a long time to go through the administrative process. But from the first sod being cut to the first train running was precisely 2 years.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah,
that's most impressive.
And it shows that it can be done.
That's really impressive, because you're saying they had to rebuild the track.
Yeah. As I said, the earthworks were largely there.
Mm-hmm.
I paraphrase slightly because there were some civil engineering
mm-hmm.
Challenges to be overcome, but nonetheless, it was quite remarkable that when everyone actually got their hard hats and their work boots on, it took 2 years to build the line.
Most impressive.
I did at the time have a house, the garden of which actually abuts onto the line.
Mm-hmm.
And I can recall in 2014, on November the 24th, which is my birthday,
mm-hmm.
the track laying train came by the bottom of my
mm-hmm.
garden and laid the tracks. And I remember being asked, "Simon, what did you get for your birthday?" And I said, "A train set." And those in the know said, "Oh, what scale?" I said, 12 inches to the foot.
Wow, it's really exciting to see new engineering. I mean, we're seeing that now, but it's not we have an existing track here. And there are places around the states where freight trains are still running. So it is a somewhat simpler process. But the political side of it, to what do you attribute the success of this? What lessons do you have to share with the rest of us who are working on similar things?
All right, there's quite a lot to unpick there. But I think let me grasp the political nettle, if I may. The campaign has always been, as we say in political terms, crossbench. We have always dealt with all political persuasions, because there is not one political party that will tell us that it's not a good idea to better serve the community. Our job has been to engage with those who are elected representatives and make sure that building the railway is the top of their agenda for serving their communities. So if I can give any pointer to any organization, it would be engage with politics, but remember whose side you're on. You're on the side of the community. And if you're on the side of the community, then every political party will be on your side. We have quite a complicated political structure in Scotland. There are 5 main political parties that share power. So it's been complicated, and it's to the campaign's credit that we have been able to engage with environmentalists, socialists, conservatives, liberals, everyone around the table, nationalists who have formed the government for some years now in Scotland, and work with them all to the greater good. I sometimes feel that the campaign would make a better government than the government, because we do embrace every ideology, because every ideology has at its heart the welfare of the community in one shape or another. I would say that patience is definitely a virtue, that the political machine will never move as quickly as the campaign machine will move. And it will always take longer than you hope to achieve what you eventually do. But by having that longevity, then you will get there. It took us nearly 20 years to see the Borders Railway, as it's branded, opened. And that's the 35 miles that run between Edinburgh and Galashiels. But for the remaining 65 miles, we still consider that to be phase 2 of our operation.
Yes.
So we've not given up on that. In fact, I would say now that we are more ambitious and more confident than ever that we can see this project completed. And yes, it will take time. And I'm often asked, how long will it take? And I say the same thing as I've always said. That first shovel went in, and 2 years later, the first train ran. So there may be things around the corner that we don't know about. But if the will is there, then it could take as short a time as that. When I'm asked, I say, well, imagine I'm a weatherman. I can tell you that in 10 years' time, it will definitely have rained on our community. I can maybe say in 6 months' time, there's every likelihood that it will have rained on our community. But if you ask me, Simon, will it rain tomorrow? I have less certainty. I can't say for absolute certainty. So if you ask me if there's going to be a train tomorrow that runs onward through Howick and on to Carlisle, I can't tell you. But I can tell you with absolute certainty, in 10 years, I believe it will be. And we will see through trains running not just between Edinburgh, Galashiels, Howick and Carlisle, but on connecting Edinburgh and the Borders with London, with the rest of England and the rest of Scotland. And we'll see this restored as a vital arm of the national network.
Yes, and I'm just looking at a map, and I can see that making that full connection is like it's like a vital piece of a system. Quite easy to see visually.
Yeah, and there are a lot of reasons to back up my rhetoric. In the past, we've understood the importance to the community. We've understood the importance to the region. And it's not been too difficult to get those messages across. What has been difficult is to say, build this railway and it will be part of the national network.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason I can say that with more confidence now is that we do have the attention of stakeholders across the UK. And particularly, our listeners may well be familiar with the High Speed 2 project, the high-speed railway that's being built between London and Birmingham, the two biggest cities in the UK. Now, you may ask me why this railway in the south of Scotland should influence a railway that's being built in the south of England. And the reason for that is that HS2 is being built at phenomenal expense. And the stakeholders in that project have said, we need to extract the best return on that investment. And that means improving the capacity of the network as a whole. And HS2 will feed into something called the West Coast Main Line, which connects many big cities between London, the northwest of England, and Glasgow in central Scotland. It's actually the busiest mixed-use railway in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And it's particularly busy on the stretch between Carlisle and Glasgow. And it's going to get even busier when HS2 opens and feeds new services into that line. And the problem is that being a mixed-use railway, carrying both passenger and freight, means that its capacity is compromised by slower moving freight trains, moderately moving regional trains, and very high-speed express trains. So if you can take some of that traffic off the West Coast Main Line and unify the speeds that trains travel, you can greatly increase the capacity on that line. And that's where Borders Railway would play its national part. And that's not me saying that. That's High Speed Rail Group, a consortium of stakeholders in the HS2 project, who've actually said, to get the best return on investment for our railway, complete the Borders Railway.
That is terrific. What a useful point this is for us in the United States, where there's something of a debate between, should we go high speed? Should we go, the higher performance, restoring lines? It's not a zero sum. It's not either or.
I think that the States needs a Roosevelt for rail, because the freeway building program that transformed the United States, unified the United States, has run its course, but saw 30 years of investment at unprecedented levels. And because of it, it abstracted from the rail network, which, in many ways was the envy of the world. It's the stuff of fantasy, the long distance rail travel in America in the 40s and 50s.
Yes.
I've seen North by Northwest more times than I care to remember. And I think for the United States to look to its connectivity in the 21st century, it would take the same sort of societal and structural change that brought about the freeway network to bring about a modern 21st century railway network. And I choose my words carefully there. I didn't say bring back, in the same way as I've not said bring back the Waverley route.
Yes. Because
that is not what the campaign is doing. The campaign is working towards a viable railway fit for purpose in the 21st century. In fact, the service that exists at the moment, albeit a short line or a branch line, as we call them here, is more frequent and runs for longer and more hours in the day than at any time in the history of that railway.
Mm-hmm.
And it's used by more people now than it ever was when it was open as a main line. The huge potential that is there to be realized by completing this line is plain for anyone to see. And I know that I've had the privilege of debating this with the first ministers of Scotland, more than one of them. And they've said to me, well, we'll see how it goes. And I can only say that, well, after 5.5 years of seeing it go like a train, isn't it time to complete this project?
Yes. Well, we're going to be watching this with great interest, both because it makes sense for the UK, obviously, and Scotland and England, but it also is really very interesting and relevant to projects that are being discussed or campaigned for in the States. So I really appreciate the chance to at last talk to you. And we'll be following you closely. Let's stay in touch. And I'm next time I get to London, I am going north, and I'm going to go and see this for myself.
Well, I hope, Karen, that before too long you'll be able to choose to go from London to Edinburgh via Carlisle and the borders.
I will be on that train.
I look forward to meeting you at Waverley Station.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you for joining me today on Train Talk.